Hello.
Hi, David. This is Paula.
Hi, Paula.
How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. I'm glad you called. I glad had the phone here because I was so combobulated today that I didn't remember.
Oh,
But this
yeah.
doesn't matter because I'm not doing anything, so that's good.
Oh, good. So this is a good time to talk.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Well, I was thinking we could start. I mean, you were telling me before we were talking
Mhm.
about your process, and
Mhm.
you were talking about, in particular, Smith and Jones, kind of looking at it as a way into describing your writing process.
Right.
And you had described, working at the Whitney and your 20 lines a day and having this, 10 years worth of books.
Yeah.
And then you started describing the actual kind of nuts and bolts of how you were working, in particular on American Water. So
Yeah.
maybe we could go back to that, and you could start. I think
Okay.
you said you were in Charlottesville at the time. Is that right?
When I started, yes. Uh, so in the year after the Natural Bridge came out, usually uh, after I finish an album or while I'm writing an album, there's one or two songs that or pieces that weren't developed enough to make it to that album. So it might usually don't start out with nothing, when
Mm-hmm.
it's time to make the next album. So I'm trying to think of an example. Yeah, like okay, here's one. Send in the Clouds. Um, uh, I I got I got the idea for that. It was just sort of a send in the clouds in those chords while I was so I lived in Charlottesville, and so I had to record a demo of all the songs for the Natural Bridge to send to the guys, so that they could, when they arrived for the practice, they'd already know. So I went to Steve West's house in Lexington, and he has you know, recording equipment. So I spent an afternoon just playing the songs on electric guitar through an amp, and just trying to make a serviceable version and of each song. And then while I was doing that, I just came up with that riff and the send in the clouds part of it, and that made the first lines, through bed, and but that was it. And I thought, well, maybe this will, when the guys come, maybe this will turn into something. But mostly my attention was for the 11 or however many songs that I had for the Natural Bridge. So I just made I just put it on tape, and it sat on this tape for a long time, and I gave it like a ridiculous title, like uh, something like Love Letter from Bob Seger to Oasis, or something like that. And so, you know, several months later, when or I might have even like presented it to the first guys, Steve and Bob, when they came and I first tried to make the Natural Bridge. I don't remember if I did or not, or I probably just had forgotten about it. So I would have rediscovered it when it was time to start again. To the first album, the first album, Starlight Walker. I didn't expect it to go really well, and I certainly didn't really. I probably thought like, well, I'm going to make this, and it'll be, you know, I didn't have any expectations for it, but I certainly didn't think that I would make 6 Silver Juice records. So, so what? The only reason the Natural Bridge happened was just that I kept writing. I wrote 2 songs really quickly, sort of out of the blue, that were. It was. What are the names? I can't remember the name of the songs. The one is Pretty Eyes, and then the other one is the. And I can think of the song. I can't think of what it's called. Anyway.
From the Natural Bridge?
Black and Brown Blues. Okay, so I wrote Black and Brown Blues, and then Pretty Eyes just after Starlight Walker, but it hadn't come out yet, and I'm in graduate school. I was just busy doing other things, but those songs came out, and they were the most fully written songs I'd ever written. Really much more developed than any of the songs I'd ever written. So, they sat there for a while. I even tried to record them with my friends, the Sky Mountain Boys, and that didn't work out. It just my vocals over their music was so smooth and pretty, so in that case I was starting out with those 2 songs, and then I kept going, and eventually when I got to 10 or 12, then there I was at Steve West. Then I went through that whole business I told you about, and then after that was over, it was springtime of maybe 90, winter of 97, 6 going to 7. Yeah. So I moved to Austin in the spring of 97. So, in the months before moving to Austin, I started writing some of the first songs. That winter of 96, 97, I think the first thing was Random Rules. And then I think the second thing was Smith & Jones. So I remember writing Smith & Jones on the back porch, so it was warmer. And I was living out in the country. I think the picture from the Melody Maker for the pictures for that album, Natural Bridge, I think I'm walking through a field with a suitcase and a horn, and that was it was a huge field in the back of a 5-acre property, and it was Steve Keen, the painter. You know him?
Yeah. Well, I don't know him personally, but I know his work.
Well, you know his work. So it was his property, and he lived in New York, and it was just a great little place. And I wrote the poem Self-Portrait at 28. It begins talking about looking out the window at the nature outside my window. And so this was it was just a beautiful place to live. But I was on my way out, and so I probably arrived in Austin with the beginnings of I had the beginnings of four or 5 songs. And then at the point where I went to New York in spring of 98 to meet with Steve for that first time to show him the songs. Since I probably had 8 songs or something at that point. And I wanted to use a song that we had sort of started doing during Starlight Walker, and that was the song Federal Dust. and I just called it Malibu. And I think I probably wanted to develop it for the Natural Bridge, but we never, I failed on that situation, and we never got a chance to do anything. So it was always there. I thought, well, we were just sitting in the studio doing Natural Bridge, and I just started saying the not much water coming over the hill thing, and he started playing along with that. And then I think he had written the Malibu thing, but he didn't have anything else with it. And so then I just filled that out, since those two parts already existed, by replicating the Malibu part, but just using the different cities. And so there is that carryover of, the carryover would have been, Malibu / Federal Dust, the riff from Set in the Clouds, the lyrics from Blue Arrangements, which I just had written out. It's the only, that in the Farmer's Hotel are the two Silver Jew songs where I wrote out lyrics and I had no music for, and gave it to Steve, and he sort of on the spot gave it some music. Mm. And then let's see, well, We Are Real, that one was in Charlottesville. I began that one, and it begins with some directions up the hill past 694, and those were directions. When I lived in Charlottesville that time, I would spend a lot of my spare time, especially during football season, up in Culpeper, where Neil and Jennifer Harriman lived. Neil Haggerty and Jennifer Harriman. And they lived in, it was when the Royal Trucks had signed their deal with Virgin Records, and so they had bought this house in Culpeper, and I used to spend time up there. I would visit them a lot. It was fun, funny, and weird, and watch football with them and stuff. And so it's a variation sort of on the directions. And I think that I sort of like tacked them onto the chords of my version of the chords of Old Lang Syne. And I think that's, to the degree that that's in there, it gives the song sort of, it makes the song sentimental in a way that maybe until I tell someone that there's some Old Lang Syne in there, then they might recognize. And Haunt If You're Lonely also, I would say, is a Charlottesville thing, because I had given that idea for Gate, my friend Gate Pratt, to develop. And so I sort of came up with the chorus, and he wrote the verses. I added a few things in. So I think, the song started in Charlottesville, but they weren't filled out until Austin, and then they weren't totally completed until Chicago. So I'd say it would be almost like Buckingham Rabbit was definitely started in Charlottesville, because that was the name of a menu item at this restaurant called the Blue Ridge Brewing Company in Charlottesville. So that was I had that name, that title, and Buckingham County is a county outside of Charlottesville, I think it's catty corner of Charlottesville, and so there's some communes out there and stuff. And so, these associations are in my mind, and there's stuff about Jesus in there because a restaurant where I was busboy and bar back in college had a bartender who after I left town, Charlottesville has a lot of hippy-dippy stuff in the surrounding countryside, so communes and things like this. And he actually started what was related to me. He started a cult of like him, the bartender, and then three or four waitresses. That was the cult. It was so strange, and he was, it went just according to, it went just like cults are supposed to go. He became monomaniacal, and he focused. He became imbued with divinity, divine powers, and things like this to the waitresses, and he impregnated them all, and then he killed himself.
Wow.
And so, and of course he thought he was, the second coming and the Messiah and stuff like this.
What's the name? What's the name of the guy, so that I can look up any articles? I'm curious.
Yeah, his name was Haines, Haines, and he had a band in the 80s called The Deal, Deal, The Deal. And so if you Google The Deal, Charlottesville, and Haines, and the restaurant was called Eastern Standard.
Okay.
And so this restaurant, Blue Ridge Brewing Company. Okay, I'm just giving you, what I'm doing right now is I'm giving you all the associations that would be in my mind as I'm putting this song together. So
I'm with you.
Buckingham Rabbit. Okay, Buckingham Rabbit is a dish that was served there. I wrote that down. It just sounded like a song title to me. So, of course, once I take that, Buckingham Rabbit, I'm not thinking of a plate of food anymore. I'm trying to see what can that become. And then I'm thinking of like the Darby Ram, which is George Washington's favorite song. It was about like a 500 or like a 50-foot tall ram, and when I'm in Virginia, I'm always thinking about Jefferson and Madison and Washington and things like this. And then, what was I saying? The Blue Ridge Brewing Company was owned by Faulkner had a daughter. I think I remember her last name was Summers, and there's a really famous story about what he said to her. She had a birthday coming up, a birthday party, and she was really young, and she had crossed some line by somehow just mentioning that these girls would be coming over, and that I think what she was trying to do was she was trying to ask him not to be on a drinking bench on that day. And he said this really cruel thing to her. He said, "Nobody remembers Shakespeare's daughter." I don't know. I don't know how it was delivered or those exact words, but it was obviously meant to really hurt her and say you're not important. So anyway, I was always aware of the fact that Faulkner, when he taught at University of Virginia near the end of his life, the last years of his life, he had like these problems with the town. He thought the people were snobby, and but at the same time, the weather was so much better for him as an old man and his wife. So he was just buying. When he died, he was just in the process of buying this property, this house that I used to drive by, and I'm trying to remember what it's called. It's called Red Soil or Red Sand or something, and I don't know if somehow his daughter wound up living also in the area. So her sons own this restaurant, the Blue Ridge Brewing Company. So I'm also thinking about that. If there was any song I thought of when I was thinking about William Faulkner in any way, it was that one. And I'm sure if I had the lyrics in front of me, I could go through every line and give you an association. For the whole album, I could go through every line and give you some association or where that might have come from. Or so it works both ways. The idea from the artist's point of view is, oh, you don't want to do that. You know, one of the most fraudulent things that I regularly see in interviews with musicians, and there's so many of them, and they're never questioned. You know, they're never questioned. They're just related by the reporter as if they were true. You know, one is always like, oh, we wrote like 200 songs for the record, and then we just selected the best 10. You know, these kind of things, you know, which when I was younger, I used to think they wrote a lot of songs, you know, and what the person is really saying is, you know, we had some riffs here and there. And, I mean, nobody writes that many songs for an album. And when they say that, unless this is a classic record, it usually sounds pretty bad for the album because if you had written that many songs, you should have a really high score for. They should all be, you know, classics. You should be able to. If you can write 100 songs, then there's probably 10 that are really, really good. So anyway, another one is, you know, the tendency of the songwriter to ward off any talk of meaning, and you know, give the old it's whatever you want to think it means, you know. And sometimes that's done because, well, you want to protect the illusion that these things you create are they're holes, and they're not. You know, I mean, for me at least, and I think for most people, they're done by taking bits from here and there and spending a lot of time trying to make it look cohesive and let's make it look singular. And so, you usually don't want a footnote. But I don't feel that way about them anymore. I guess like the idea is like, oh, well, everyone has their private association with a certain song they care about. And when you learn, like, I don't know if that really happens you learn the story behind the song and it somehow, I'm trying to think of an example I just read about the other day was, the girl, Lord. Is that, you pronounce it Lord, right?
I don't know. I'm out of the loop.
Believe me, I haven't even heard the song, but I know it's a really, it was one of the very popular songs last year. And I know I've read about it. I know what the lyrics are about. It's called Royals, and people have criticized it for itself being critical, which makes me just interested in it because it's supposedly critical of materialism. And so I read about it a bunch, and then the other day I read that where that song began was in a really unlikely place, which was she had seen a picture of George Brett, who was played for the Kansas City Royals in the 70s. He was a famous player, and I guess she's from New Zealand. She doesn't know anything about baseball, and she certainly doesn't know anything about the teams or where they're from. She just saw a picture of this American baseball player with the script, blue script across his chest that said Royals. And that's how it works, She saw that, and she didn't know it. She didn't care what its original association was. In fact, at that point, you want to block that out. It's like just with Buckingham Rabbit. Like it's not. What I want is the words, and what I want to repurpose them. And at that point, what makes those words generative is cutting them out of their context. And so at that point, you're open to those words leading to anything in the universe except back to where they came from. So once I knew that I liked the sound of that word, Buckingham Rabbit, and I knew I liked the picture it gave in my mind, and I knew that I didn't have to decide then, but that I put it where I put everything that captures my attention, and I just think of it as potential. And anyway, I guess to a certain person, they don't want to think about baseball. They want to, to a kid who likes that song, I guess. But I don't necessarily think it's trivia, and I think most of the time artists try to shield it. But to me, it's interesting, and
it seems
I guess I'm not against the idea of demystifying the things that I've done myself.
I'm thinking, your background in poetry and your having studied it and probably undergone many critiques, talking about the meaning of things. It's coming to mind that might have some impact here. Like you're more open because you're experimenting with words and even in your expression of what these different elements mean as a whole, it's something completely different. So you're demystifying maybe some of the material and the how, but the actual outcome is still a mystery.
Right, yeah. Right, exactly. And that outcome, when I'm talking about the sources, I'm really just giving you examples of me being a receiver,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm giving you examples of how I take input, and so it is true. Like, then I can tell you stories about output and how I feel about what I'm outputting, and what those materials have become to me, or what I hope to have made them represent. And so I don't think it's, and also I think because I've acquainted myself with the idea of being done with writing, that I'm not so protective of, like, for instance, the things you do to develop a persona, to build a shell or a consistent identity, and the artificiality of that process. Like, if you're like, let's say if you're Steve, you have, it's part of what he does to project, for some reason I just cannot pull words, to project ease and sort of nonchalance. And it's, now I can see a lot of psychological defenses that exist in him that make it important for him to downplay how much things matter. And at the same time, those defenses, it's sort of John Updike saying, like, fame is a mask that grows into the face.
Mm-hmm.
And, you, of course, you become more like the character you develop and inhabit. And then that's true of everybody, especially more nowadays, where everyone does the things that I did in the 90s to, sort of create some sort of association, some hybrid poet, songwriter, just to find my little niche, that was, I would be embarrassed to put it into words, but whatever that persona is that people who have paid any attention to what I do associate with me, some mixture of, like, for instance, people think of artists as effeminate. So really early on, I remember growing a beard seemed like a natural thing to do, because no one had beards in the 90s, and it just seemed like also it emphasized sort of the masculine fiction writer side of creativity. Like, I was going to go there because I want to compensate for my true insecurities about masculinity, or about being a poet, or about things I want to hide. I would say all the time in interviews, like, people, men with beards have something to hide, and I still feel that way, when I go through periods when I don't have a beard and when I do have a beard. And it really, really makes a difference. When I don't have a beard, I barely ever look in the mirror. It's like too much. There's too much me there, Mm-hmm. When I look in the mirror, I want to have clothes on, and a beard is sort of an extension of your clothes. It's just the top of your clothes. And anyway, to speak about the pressure of building an identity using. Oh, what I was going to say was that another reason that I don't mind deconstructing the image that I try to project is because I've thought so much about how the work of the artist in projecting image, in creating a saleable identity, is now completely generalized. And so it's work that everybody does. It's almost like, in some ways, everybody's become more of a poet because of Twitter. And everybody's become more of a celebrity because of the need to market yourself, your business, and what you do. And in some ways, I connect that with my withdrawal from life, almost like when I came out of college in 1989, I, for multiple purposes, to spurn my father and to get out of his world and to make sure that nothing that I did even bumped up against it. I purposely chose obscure niches, low competition niches, and two of those would be noisy music and poetry. And in 1989, there couldn't have been a smaller focus on those things. There was there was a very small population interested in either of those things. And so naturally, as someone who dislikes competition, and I was drawn to those things. And I started to get nervous. It was like I'd only been working out of school for 2 or 3 years when Pavement started to really become to show up in places that I never expected music that I was associated with or people I knew to show up in the New York Times or things like that outside of music papers and fanzines. And that made me nervous. And
why?
I'm sure.
What about it? Because it was...
Yeah. Well, because I guess I could see, okay, I remember a big change for me was when Steve came, he had left New York and gone home to record the songs for the Perfect Sound Forever EP. And he came back and he played on the guitar the songs To Breeze Slide and From Now On. And I was really, really blown away. I was like, gosh, you know,
Mm-hmm.
you just went up a level, you know, and then when he brought the tape back to New York from Slant and Shannon, he really had gone up a level. And but the time that I remember feeling, I mean, those moments, I was really proud. And the time that I felt a little, I guess I would say I felt alienated, was when she did the next thing after Sand and Sharon was Wiry Domestic. And I immediately recognized that again, he had done something better. But it was I was really bothered by a single lyric, and it was, "I've got style for miles and miles." That was, I was just thinking about this the other day. That really was the place. That's the place where everything splits for me in history, in my history, and in what I've seen in music history and things like that. Not on a world historical level, although someone might make that claim, I guess, but just personally, it's also where we split. You know, I don't mean we actually in our friendship split at that moment. I mean, that's where we diverge as people. That he, although just to play, I accepted that style is it's something that I totally accepted and used, and in everything I've made, it's the outward embrace of it that offends me.
Is it not irony? Would you say it's not irony?
It's not what?
Would you say it's not irony? Like this slacker mentality?
I think that he was being ironic, of course, yeah, and he was sort of he was trying to do what I was saying about growing a beard. He was trying to say, well, in our world of music, you don't talk about style. It's the world of touch and go bands and the bands you go see at Maxwell's and that kind of music. It's all very cynical, and so at the time, I guess I recognized that what he was doing was sort of, he was saying he was being oppositional to that, but and in a way sort of he was it was an announcement of no fear about being about this little band becoming a celebrity type thing.
Okay. Can I ask you something?
And yeah.
So at this time, when you're making music, what are you kind of imagining? Are you doing it because it's fun? Are you doing it? I'm just curious, like what, obviously you're saying that you kind of wanted to hide out and listen to noisy music and write poetry and be in these low competition niches. And then you're producing albums. And of course, Drag City is a very young label. So, you don't have the expectations, as you said, but what is driving you? Like, why are you feeling like you want to make music?
It's really, I guess, it is the opportunity to create, um, the music that I really that that really stimulated me in the '80s, especially the American post-hardcore music, is even to this day really faceless. Um, there's very little photographic documentary of those bands. Obviously, it's like a weird gap because obviously the '60s bands and the '70s bands were all oriented towards making themselves saleable. And obviously in the '90s and since, especially with the addition of the technology of being able to take pictures of everything, there's millions of pictures of bands. But there really aren't that many. Most of the bands that I listen to, I had no idea what the people looked like. I mean, maybe definitely, especially if we're talking about like the people the bands that I knew via 7-inch only. Where would I see a picture of them? I guess a black and white picture I might see in a fanzine, and maybe I've seen up to even like the Meat Puppets, who I loved. I've seen them live, but I've maybe seen one promo photo of them, color promo photo of them ever. The Silver Jews I thought of as almost like something you would receive from Eastern Europe, something that was it was something that freed me from it was definitely it was me trying to take the best parts of the best experiences that I'd had with anonymous artists, and in trying to give those, which I saw as little bits that I collected, little pieces of knowledge here and there. And that's like, if you look at the back of like the Arizona record, and there's just like this little collage, and each like little piece I mean to like imply something, and those implications are not necessarily there's a mixture. A lot of it's fictional deployments of associations. So it was definitely sort of used as a chance to, it's a chance to do what somebody does with their Facebook page, I guess, as far as what your likes are and things like that. You get to take, but instead of using products or other artworks, or just putting your favorite books and albums, which I think, like there's your opportunity to like, you don't really want to put exactly your favorite books and albums. You're trying to, I assume, present the best you, or I think probably a lot of people present it. There's some things they like that fit that fit the list, and then there's some things that maybe don't need to be on the list, and maybe you're not proud of them, or you don't consider it. You think it sends the wrong message about you, even though you do care about it.
So you would say that each of these albums was sort of like a curation of you at that moment, the sorts of ideas.
Yeah, exactly. Curating, but using just using images and creating illusions, misunderstandings. So developing from the pictures I would get from, like, let's say, the little bit of information on a JFA 7-inch insert, the names of the people they thank, and the name of the studio, or, you know, the little bits of information that behind which I assumed there was a life, and it was up to me or not up to me to fill that in. It's sort of like when I take walks at night around the neighborhood. I'm really it's always been extremely stimulating to me. It's just to look at a house and just to see an illuminated window. Whether it doesn't, it's actually almost better if there's a curtain drawn. The color, I get an impression of what lies behind the curtain. I get a really strong impression that I don't get for some reason when I just pass a house in the daytime. For some reason, just the square of light gives me access to an imaginary room. I mean, I'm fully aware that behind the window, it's, none of what I'm seeing is probably there. And I'm usually I'm thinking of, like, I think it has something to do with, like, the first lit windows I saw when I was a kid, pulling up to, like, my grandparents' house, and there was what was behind those windows, what was inside, things that I liked. I mean, when I'm imagining what lies behind those windows, they're good. They're nice places. I mean, I'm never thinking of some terrible place. They're almost like TV screens, and the way people are really into, like, a sitcom from their childhood. Like, someone will draw a blueprint of the house that it's supposedly set in. Why people are interested in that is always funny. Like, I wanted to know, where in New York is All in the Family? It's the pictures in the intro of houses. I found out, I was asked about it when I was a kid, and somehow I found out it was Queens. And then someone later told me it was Astoria, Queens. And of course, I'm sure that was part of the program, that it was Queens and obviously not the Bronx, for a certain reason. And but after a certain point, it's just a sound stage, So maybe people write with the idea in mind that this isn't Long Island, this isn't the Bronx, but the reality is, at that point, is still useful. The association with Queens to me personally. So when I became someone who would make my own things, I was really aware of that power. And that's what I was playing with more. I guess I knew that I didn't have the ability to write All in the Family. But I was pretty sure I could write what do you call the intro of the show? I don't know.
Theme song.
What is it?
The theme song?
Yeah, well, the theme song and whatever the images are whatever you call that little thing. I was pretty sure I could write that, which was just composed of little bits, little pictures, or the odd couple, in the city, when they're walking around and during whatever you see during a theme song in a 70s TV show. I could do that, but not write what was behind it. And so then, would that be enough? Couldn't I fool the world if I could just create the theme song? And I think that's a lot of what, it's a lot of what art is or has been. It's been, like in Actual Air, there's a section called Cantos for James Michener.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea is, well, I'm never going to write 150 cantos for James Michener. I don't even know what really a canto is, but I can write something that implies that these are excerpts from some long work. Then I don't have to worry about. Then I'm free to put associations or put signs out there that don't lead anywhere, because where they lead is really where the work is, and that I wasn't made to, like, novels of ideas and stuff like that. But because my own lifetime lines up nicely with the onset of postmodernism, I'm suddenly able to be an artist, because I wouldn't have been able to be an artist in the 1950s, because I just don't have this quality to write organic, whole works. I only have this talent for trickery, and that talent is sort of reverse engineering of what I've experienced, and it's sort of like set design. Like I'm going to design a set that implies a story, but I'm not going to worry about the story,
mm-hmm.
and I'll let it. I know the way the witness of that set mind works, and I'm pretty sure that sets up a valuable relationship between me and the reader or the viewer, the listener. And I'm pretty sure actually that it sets up possibilities that aren't there in modernist works. That it sets up because I found new worlds from the surfaces of whole pieces of art that I prefer to the actual whole piece of art. And there's like this thing that has happened to me my whole life, which is reading poetry, reading criticism, where a piece of poetry suddenly appears in the text. And of course, it's usually like some notable moment in a poem, some great image, or whatever the writer's selecting. And to go back to the poem, often that little piece of brilliance, the poem itself isn't interesting to me. So when I started to write poetry, I thought, well, what if I just wrote poems that were made up of those pieces? That's really what I like, and I'm disappointed in poetry, really, for what it is. But the poetry that I expect, I would expect to be the source of that line, if it was all as good as that line, is what's interesting to me, and so that's why I think when I walk around and I look at houses, I'm able to, and I enjoy having these pretty strong impressions that come to me of what life is like on the other side of those curtains, and it's like it's a daily pleasure. It's pretty much why I wait till dark to go for walks. Mm. It's something on the level of, like, you know, how complex smells are, that you can't say from where in your childhood, but actually, it doesn't actually have to be a smell you're smelling. You can just think of a smell, like a certain room. If you just try to think of it a certain way, you might pick up something that's correlative to a sense. Or I'll just say smells from childhood that you just come across again, actual smells, and they're extremely deeply experienced, much more than a picture of a house that you haven't seen in a long time. They're somehow psychologically moving, and that's what I'm interested in. And at a certain point, I realized that the smell, the flash of the image, the thing partly seen, that those things are also pieces. And I guess that's why I always associate what I did and as having to do with the Whitney. And, you know, the very first show when Steve and I started working at the Whitney was called Image World. And you could probably look it up. It was a 1990 group show at the Whitney that someone had curated and put together with just, the theme was just different. I can't even remember the pieces. There was a non-June pig thing, and but there was all this text around it explaining what it means, what it means that our society has become so filled with images. And, you know, that same year, I remember at the Museum of Modern Art, there was the high and low art show. And, like, both those things seem really so obviously a part of our culture now that it's weird to think that there would have had to be a show to explain to people this idea that high and low art, that you can have, look at comics on certain people as art, and all the stuff that we just take for granted now. So a lot of the ideas that were to become more important, like Facebook, or like the idea that rock music could be an art form. It was spoken about seriously as an art form. That there would be bands that would play at the Guggenheim, you know, in a decade or two. So a lot of those things were just seedlings when I was first doing this stuff. And
can I?
Go ahead.
Well, finish what you were saying.
Oh, just that in a way, it's really ironic that I wanted to get away from my father's world, the world of just the world of business class, a businessman. And in some ways, his world captured my world, but also in other ways, like his work became way more like my work. And my work, you know, to the degree that it became about sales and money and me worrying about how many people would come to the show and stuff like that, it became business. But his work became about
trickery,
entertainment, entertaining PR, it's probably trying to be funny and shit like that.
And trickery, like what you were saying.
Trickery, oh, certainly, yeah. There's a lot of that, a lot of irony to do with poetry and propaganda, and how I tried to get away, but at the same time, we sort of converge in certain areas. Although my interest is not in. It's persuading. Maybe it's persuading people. I can't say it's not self-interest. It's just not the same kind of self-interest. And I definitely, I have to think about that more.
Okay. Well, I just want to pivot for a second and go back to the album.
Yeah.
And, you've given me this kind of overview of some of the elements in the songs, and a lot of them come from Charlottesville. It feels like almost a bizarre love letter to Charlottesville in a way. So I'm kind of wondering if you could get even more detailed about the time you were at Steve Keen's and how you were actually writing. Were you just moving around in your normal day-to-day, kind of picking up information and sitting at the coffee shop writing down things that came to mind? Or were you actually sitting, at the house somewhere? Like, what did that place look like? And were you alone? Like what time of day was it? What kind of, what were you listening to? What were you reading? That kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, it was, I hadn't gotten to the point of, all the writing I did would be at home in the 10 to 3 p.m. time frame. If I went into town, it would be usually to go to Gates' house, and it would be after he worked like 9 to 6, an architect, so I would go to his house, 7, and hang around with him, drink or smoke pot or whatever. Wasn't a lot to do in Charlottesville. Never been. So, but still, there's anytime after my work day is over, I still have a piece of paper, a notebook, and a pen in my pocket. And I'm still writing ideas down. And they're coming out in conversation, just bullshitting, and they're coming from all directions. And it really is something that I found you had to be receptive to receive, and it's all about looking for what can be repurposed, and that comes from all kinds of places. That, like, as banal a place as a piece of paper with some directions that you keep in your glove compartment, someone's house, to trying to think of what other song on there I haven't mentioned.
Something more profound or intense. Or...
Yeah. Always doing a lot of reading, and always when I'm reading, keeping an eye out for words that seem to have potential power. And so just collecting a sheet of words while I'm writing a book, reading books, always with a pen.
Do you remember any of the books that you were reading at that time?
I can actually get you a list.
Yeah, you don't have to tell me now. I'd just be curious.
Yeah, in fact, I think that all of those books, when I left Charlottesville, I put them in storage, and then I got them out of storage a couple of years ago, and I lent them to a friend of mine who she didn't get to go to college, and so I said, let this be your college. And I just meant to lend them to her, and I wanted them back, and I've never been able, and she lives here, I've never been able to bring it up. I always want to bring it up, like, can I get some of those back? Yeah. Anyway, so this actually could be an excuse for me to broach the subject.
Uh-huh.
Like, I need you to write down the names of those books.
Uh-huh. Were you writing lyrics and then sitting down with your guitar and writing the music, or were you sort of doing it simultaneously?
Well, the guitar playing, sometimes the words would come out right with the chords, like just turn in the clouds, like dun 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 dun. Most of the time, just sitting around playing guitar and coming up with chord progressions that sound nice, and then just with my very basic notation, just writing. Like there's a chord, like there's a lot of chords. I just don't know what they're called officially. So, like with random rules, like I just came up with that chord progression, and there's one chord near the end of the phrase. I think it's like the dom on random rules, where I do this version, a variation on, I think it's an A kind of F thing, but I just always write it as RR, and I have some association with that as being a railroad. The way my fingers are displayed, it looks like a railroad signal. And so even to this day, if I use that chord, I'll just write RR. So I would have these on a separate notebook, as many as 50 or 100 little 3 and 4 chord progressions with little notes like on, fast, emphatic, little, or maybe a song that I associate it with, so that if I come back to it in a couple months, I'll remember, well, if you hum this song and you play these chords, I'm giving notes to myself, Because I'm just getting this idea right now while I'm playing guitar, and I'm going to write it down, and I want to put some hints in there because I might not see it again for a while. But I like what it's doing now. But I know part of it, a lot of it, has to do with the things that aren't represented by just the names of the 3-4 chords. So associations, like even like something, I might associate with for some reason, like that you wouldn't think had any sort of musical content, but whatever I think of when I think of, I don't know, the Romanov dynasty, or just some historical event, that will help, or so. Just the chorus and a few words about how they're played, and then at the same time, I'm just as a way of life, because I'm really like can't believe, especially back then, I couldn't believe that I had been pulled it off, that I hadn't, like since I'd left the Whitney, I was able somehow to put together a living, that I was still having my days and not having to work for anyone. And it just seemed like so unlikely that I felt obligated to get up. I would feel guilty if I didn't get up before noon, and I would feel bad if I didn't try to do something productive writing-wise. So I was able to build a lot of, like, a big surplus of ideas. And so then when, songs didn't take me over, I had to put them together, so, the chords for Random Rules were one thing, and it was just some chords that had a melancholy feel to me. Random Rules was just a phrase in my notebook that, that originated. Maybe I heard someone on TV say, I hate these random, your rules are random, or whatever, and my ear perked up, or maybe I was looking at the chords that I'd written down, and I saw RR, at the same time, I looked over at my piece of paper and it said random. I don't know in this case where it came together, but at some point they got written down as Random Rules, and I knew, okay, here's one thing I knew. I knew that when I wrote it down because it had something extra, which was that it worked two ways, with random rules as in Beavis and Butthead, Motley Crue rules or whatever. Rules as dominates, and random rules as arbitrary rules. So random rules as a sort of a sort of, I love randomness, and random rules as a critique. Mm-hmm. And so there's those two very different things, and they're contained in there. So to me, that is generous, that it already expresses an ability to branch. And so that's more valuable to me than writing down arbitrary rules. or writing down recklessness is great. I love anarchy. Here's, and it also, without either of those meanings, sounds nice. It's got the alliteration's nice. And I know that if I could deploy it somewhere, it would look, if I saw a novel called Random Rules, I would pull it off the shelf. So it's going to go down. I'm going to write it down. And I'm playing the song, and I find a way to make it. I come up with the beginning. I know I wanted to start with this line, and then I realized that the rhyme comes cool, okay, and then Random Rules, and it ends there. And it's always nice to have the title be something that gets billed to and then just laid out. So this is working, I'm making this work, and it seems like the way this song is starting to look, it's starting to look like it is about the way the character in the song. So it looks like the way it's a worldview. It's his character's worldview, and I guess if it means randomness is rules in the sense of dominates, that seems like a third thing it means now. First I was thinking of it as when people used to say seniors rule as a sort of exclamation of pride, and then I was also thinking of it as like an ingredient in a critique, like I hate these random rules, and then it's all of a sudden it's a lament, like you can try and put things together, you can try and make things happen, you can fight to make things right, but you'll be defeated by entropy. And then I'm like, okay. But when I wrote it down, that hadn't come yet. It was much more of a cheaper idea. Just like when I was saying Smith and Jones, I wrote down it was a cheap idea. Like, this could be on a belt buckle. It would be kind of like a white supremacist brag. So a lot of these things start out as cheap ideas. They start out as wisecracks. And when I come back to them, I look to repurpose them in a way that makes them important. And to me, what is important? What's important is saying something about a truth about life. And when I see life, how do I see life? I see it from a romantic perspective, or I'll adopt an existential perspective. I'm using postmodernist methods to accomplish older goals. Because again, it's like I'm not trying to display postmodernism like Steve would be. Like Steve's like, I'm not making any bones about the fact that this is just the slapdash production here. That's how I am. I'm nonchalant, and I'm just slapdash. For me, I'm like, I'm gonna fool everybody, and just thinking, and that's and at a certain point I go, whoa, this is deep. This feels deep. I don't really know what the wild kindness is. It's just I see a picture of, it's something about nature. It's just it's the expanse. It's something about the world, the far reaches of the world, the depopulated reaches of the world. They're not empty. It's sacred space. It's sad, but it's hope. It gives it. I'm not going to be the swans. I'm not out to depress everybody and get hopelessness. That's the way I feel. I feel maybe more like the swans, to stare and there's no hope. But if I, have a chance at, I don't want to be a liar. I'm never going to be trying to tell everyone that everything's going to work out. But in fact, if I can just sort of, if I can use a pivot from sort of existential truths to, and then transcend them. That's what music. That's one of the things that music can do. So that's what I would be looking for. Like always, like to escape. I always see the chorus escaping the assertions of the verse. And that happens in Random Rules, it happens in Smith and Jones, Wild Kindness, We Are Real, all the songs that I like the best are going to be those ones that relieve the tension that are built into the verses, and then I'm being honest and I'm being healing or therapeutic at the same time. So I'm not a liar, and I'm also being not a leader, but I don't know, like
a rogue.
A which?
A rogue.
What's a rogue?
Rogue, R-O-G-U-E.
Is it a rogue like a trickster?
Yes.
I guess I'm saying like I wanted to tell the truth, but then I want to be more like, I guess like I don't want to say this, like a rabbi or something. Like my ultimate aim is to heal, to be therapeutic.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't want to start there. I don't feel comfortable about being a self-help artist. But in the end, I really am interested in self-help, and I really am interested in helping people. And, I really would, if I wasn't so old, I mean, if I could do it all over again, I probably would become a therapist, a psychotherapist. And it's what on a personal level, it's what I'm the best at as far as helping people with, like, it's the only thing I really do on a regular basis effectively is listen to people. And from just thinking so much and reading so much about, like, in trying to find contentment or happiness for my own self and get out of my tumultuous moods, I've just come up with a lot of ideas about how to proceed. And so I often am that person for different people. I'm often the person, just a good person to come and unload on and be listened to, and sometimes be given, some advice. So I think advice is also a lot of what I'm doing, and it's probably what's not in poetry for me. And in poetry, there isn't so much of this communion, this sort of priestly aspect. My poetry is closer to gameplay. It's colder, and it's closer to being a joke, like literally, in the sense of, not in a negative sense, but just as jokes, as things that I'm actually interested in and how they're made and built. And so music is like a great alibi for me to express sort of desires that are not, that society doesn't encourage men to spend time worrying about other people's feelings. Whatever, it's a way to do that, and it's like the only place, music's the only place where people who won't talk about their feelings will feel their feelings. Or, people, it's a place where, as someone who's growing up, had too many feelings and too little control of them, and felt alienated from what I perceived around me as people who weren't paralyzed by their feelings. It's like a place where no one can say that's out of line, or keep it on the surface, So it's permission to it's just
to feel.
Yeah, it is like a good deal for me, because like art just in itself it doesn't have enough personal value. There has to be that low art aspect, for me to really feel proud. Like the things that I really feel proud of are going to be those things, those creations that just, yeah, those just helpful.
Yeah. I think I gotta jump off soon.
Sure.
This has been really helpful. I think I've got a lot of material here, and just like taking my journalistic hat off for a moment, I'm noticing as we have this conversation how much like resonance there is for me in my life, and I think that's what drew me to this project. So just feeling a lot of appreciation for all that you're sharing, and
Good.
I think, I mean, I'll share one thing, which is that I have about 10 really close friends that are therapists, so I'm very embedded in that world, and the healing arts are very important to me as well. So yeah, and
good.
So on some level, I think maybe I was picking that up. You know, it was coming into my world through this album, so I appreciate that.
Well, good. And you know, if there's, you know, obviously, it's just a function of today where the conversation is going. If there's obviously places like where you probably wanted to let the conversation go that you haven't. If you want to email me things like that, especially just like little short answer things.
Absolutely.
Like little detailed things. You could just like, if you wanted to send me like 50 short answer questions that just take a couple words, I can do that for you.
I probably will be following up with you.
Yeah.
My what I'm imagining is basically what the core of the questions I've been talking to you about are to work on the first chapter of the book, which I'm going to use as the proposal. So I've been very focused in my questions for that reason, but there's, you know, a bevy of questions that I could ask if I do, in fact, you know. What
did you say the first chapter is about? Which?
The first chapter is really about my experience with the album coming into my hands at this time when the record store was really important, because it was like the year before Napster happened. But also talking about your process of writing the album. So where, you know, what that looked like and how these ideas were forming and how the album was like, how the seed was planted. That's essentially what the first chapter is going to be. How the seed was planted in me and the seed was planted for this album. And then I'm going to expand outward from there. But I don't want to do too much work before they say okay and tell me to go ahead.
Sure. Well, when you get to that point, I can like go through and find like the drafts, the way they began or something, or I could like scan the notebook page where, you know, somewhere it came from, and you could see what was written around it, so you could see the context of, you know, the things that I didn't use or how it was pulled out and stuff like that. Like later on, if you know, wind up writing the book, I can, you know, just Xerox stuff for you later. So
absolutely, that would be great. Thank you so much. Have a great evening, David, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, Paula. Bye-bye.
Bye.